Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and the winner on the poll for today's topic of discussion was: what global role does the UK intend after Brexit? So obviously the nature of Brexit that we're on course for at the moment, although there's been various little wriggles happening in the last couple of days, has been one of no deal, which is the ultimate isolationist. So basically, with the UK leaving the EU, we're also leaving a very powerful lobbying group, within which we have major influence. We still have a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, but our influence has actually waned in other areas. So, for example, since the Brexit referendum, we no longer have representation on the International Court of Justice, something that was never the case before. This may not show up on most people's radars, but it is a serious sign of UK's diminished diplomatic clout. Governments, including the UK, lobby very hard to get one of the 15 seats. And this time, we failed. On a more personal level, and I've discussed this before, we also had the issue with Mark Zuckerberg. So when summoned to appear before a number of legislative bodies in the wake of the Facebook scandals, Mr. Zuckerberg agreed to attend hearings in the US, as well as the EU, but he refused to attend a summons by the British Parliament to attend a select committee interview. Another example of how little power the UK has now. So we can't wield diplomatic power on our own. We know that. And if Brexit does go ahead, we'll soon not be able to wield as much as part of that powerful lobbying group either. So what's the plan for the UK influence after Brexit? So the simple answer at the moment may be that not much thought has actually been put into it. After all, government departments, including both ministers and civil servants, have been stretched beyond breaking point in just making the impossible demands of Brexit happen. There hasn't even been time for many domestic policies, much less thinking about the future. However, there are some who have been given some consideration to our future foreign policy. And this goes beyond simply worrying that remaining within EU systems, but not as a member state, will see us not only have to follow EU rules without a say in them, which is serious enough, but also that rules could be specifically created, which will be especially harsh on the UK by member states, let's say, that are not necessarily all that friendly with us, who of course are going to continue to have a say. Now, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Labour's Emily Thornberry, was given a speech recently where she emphasised promoting UK values around the world rather than just commercial interests. This would include human rights issues and a review of the export of arms from the UK. Now, it's interesting to note that she regarded it as being similar to what was being pushed in terms of foreign policy by the last Labour government, particularly towards the start in the form of Robin Cook. But, as she added, with realism. She said it's like that, but with realism. Now, my personal view is that you don't persuade violent governments to abandon violence. You either incentivise them or you force them. Now, it's fairly obvious that Jeremy Corbyn's government would never be in the business of forcing people. So that means incentivising, but what incentives would we have to offer? Remember, we're already in a world where our influence has dropped. And not just since we were a superpower, which is now beyond living memory for the vast majority of the population, but even just in the last couple of years. A Conservative plan, on the other hand, was for a greater emphasis on free trade. Bob Seeley, a Tory MP, wants the UK to reform the WTO to reduce protectionism and promote human rights, he says, and tackle slavery. But for me, that suffers from the same delusions as from Thornberry. Not only does the WTO have no real clout to force anyone to do anything, it administers a set of rules that have all been agreed by its members. And then we come on to the real problem. If we couldn't reform the EU, because that's what David Cameron tried to do, of course, I also don't think he was realistic about the time frame, then what hope have we got of reforming an organisation that comprises most nations on earth, all with competing demands? And let's be honest, the countries that get a benefit from protectionism are not really going to be all that sold on the idea of global free trade. Now, I suspect what it's really about is that we've left a major free trade area in the EU, and of course now Japan has joined, but we want to keep all the benefits of that without accepting other responsibilities. So we push for the entire world to be a free trade area, which would be good in many people's eyes, not denying that, but we continue to behave like bandits in the Wild West with our own lower standards in order to remain competitive within it. Oh, and then tack on a bit about human rights, which Conservative MPs have already said they wish to abolish as soon as we leave the EU. Oh, and slavery as well, just to make it sound benevolent. But if the UK ever were to seriously want to promote human rights and the abolition of slavery, it could easily do this closer to home. Too many people in the UK already have their basic human rights ignored, in some cases as the deliberate result of government policy. And modern day slavery also exists within our shores. We could start by actually setting an example to the wider world than to carry on pretending we have any authority to tell others what to do. And as for global free trade, leaving an organisation which is slowly expanding free trade areas in the global market, especially with the New Deal for Japan, as I say, also seems to be slightly at odds with that. Especially in the event of a no-deal Brexit, is he seriously trying to suggest that we should tell the world to pull down barriers at just the time we're going to be throwing them up? But what about those actually in charge at the moment? Well, the current Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has said that Britain should champion liberty, rights and the rule of law around the world. The thing is, I can't help feeling that the Home Secretary's recent apparent rejection of the rule of law with regards to the media-dubbed ISIS bride does somewhat undermine that notion. I also have to go back to the main thing that senior Conservative MPs were most looking forward to with Brexit, which was to tear up the European Convention on Human Rights, a British creation that was seen as vital by a post-war United Kingdom, but is now only seen as a barrier to wealth for the fat cat paymasters of the Tory party. So we could easily find ourselves a year after Brexit fatally undermining any suggestion of promoting these values, as we are accused of failing to uphold international law and removing rights from UK citizens as opposed to enhancing them. So we already know we're going to be losing influence, but we'll also lose credibility. As I said before, we've got no hope of persuading anyone of anything that we are not exemplifying ourselves. Getting people to do what you will not do yourself is the preserve of tyrants, and we no longer are. And even if our government wanted to be, we haven't the power. Now, I recently read a piece, quite interesting, that described William Gladstone's famous saying as a Victorian Foreign Secretary that his first principle of foreign policy was good government at home. And this was from a time when Britain actually had power and influence. So perhaps our current politicians maybe should just heed his words and realise that we will never be taken seriously on the world stage until we have good government in the UK, whether in or out of the EU. And the first step, the first very essential step to that, is not in deciding how the world should be, but in how the UK should be. I've said it before, no one has actually published a roadmap for what a post-Brexit UK should look like. At the very least, Brexiteers pushing for this outcome should have done so. But now that we're in this situation, and unless this week's events somehow avoid that outcome, which is possible, our government do now need to give it serious consideration. Are we seriously just going to drop out of the EU and then try and decide what we should do next? There's not a nation on earth who is going to pay any attention to our Foreign Office while we do not have our own house in order. One thing that will definitely have to change, however, post-Brexit is the notion that we exist as a bridge between America and Europe. As a scientist and a mathematician, nothing for me has exemplified this niche more than units. So America uses the imperial system of measurement. Europe, continental Europe, uses the far more sensible metric system. But in the UK, we use both. We use metric for some things and imperial for others, stubbornly refusing to pick a system. Even in this, we're trying to have our cake and eat it, have it all ways, and giving our young people in schools conversion headaches when it comes to maths lessons. But what sort of bridge can we possibly form post-Brexit with a straw-haired buffoon on one side of the Atlantic and acrimony in Europe on the other due to our reckless actions, we will be the furthest thing from any sort of connection. So whether or not we come to any coherent plan for a future relationship with the world, our old ones will most certainly be cast aside, as they are already being, and maybe this will please the isolationists who promoted Brexit. Time will tell. Or maybe not, if Parliament decides to get serious this week. We shall see. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe for further content, please. And click the bell notification while you're at it. Until next time, I'll see you later.